As a test of our deep understanding of arrays, let's talk about two-dimensional arrays in Java now. Okay, so we're not going to be using these in class for a little while, but just to get acquainted with them, let's check them out today. So here I'm going to have a bunch of code, which I'm just going to jump straight to the visualizer on this one, which is going to allow us to create arrays of array references. Okay. So the syntax in Java for making what in other languages, what you might call a two-dimensional array is as follows. When I do int bracket, int square braces, what it's saying is make for me an array of integer array references. Okay. So here we get one box, and it's allowed to store a reference to a list of int array references. Okay. So let's see an example here. So when I say Pascal's triangle equals new int 4, what that's going to do is going to create an array of int array references. Each of these is allowed to point at an array. Okay, an array of what? Of integers. And this right here is a 64-bit address of this array of array references. Okay, getting a little, but don't worry. Okay. Now, just as we could anytime, we could create a variable of the type of these boxes. So what's the type of each of these boxes? Int array references. So I can make a new such variable and assign it equal and copy the bits. Okay, there you go. All right. We'll have a more interesting example down here. Okay, so next up we could say, you know what? I'm tired of this being null. In fact, I want to point it at an int array because that's what it's for, right? This is an array for looking at int arrays. So what we're going to do is create here an array of size 1, which contains the value 1, and point this at it. So the visualizer does that for us. Okay. So next up we say, okay, you know what? I'm tired of this being null. So I'm going to make a new array of 2, size 2, and point this at it. Okay, kind of a funny way of drawing this, but there you go. Now we say, all right, same deal. We're going to repeat this and create 2 more int arrays and point our pointers at it. Okay. So actually, if you are visualizing this stuff later, okay, for your reference, there is an option, same one we had before, which prefers non-nesting layouts, where we get box and pointer diagrams. It also makes us have vertical layouts. Okay. So if we rerun that, now we get what might be a little easier to read. Okay, maybe. All right, next up we have row 2. This line, what it does is it creates a box of 64 bits that can store a reference to an int array, one of these. And then we point that at Pascal's triangle 2. So what do? We copy the bits, right? What are the bits? This arrow. So in other words, row 2 points at this. Okay? So what's interesting about this is that we can actually modify our original Pascal's triangle object up here using this row 2 reference. So in your mind, you might think of it as, okay, well, it's like a sequence of arrays, and it's called Pascal's triangle. I can actually get a hook inside like the middle of it, right? I'm just going right into the belly of that Pascal's triangle, and I can, for example, say row 2, item 1 is now -5. Okay? So be aware that's possible because they're all the same. Alternate ways to instantiate an array. Well, we've seen this one already. So if we say matrix int equals new int, actually I'm going to go to the non-vertical layout for this part. And we'll go back. Okay, sorry. Scroll. Okay. So one way to create one of these array of arrays is the syntax we had before. So that does just what we saw before. It creates an array of array references. But Java actually also allows us to specify a number here. So what this number means is, you know what? I don't want just a bunch of empty array references. I want you to, Java, create for me a bunch of default arrays of size 4 that will all get the default value for the type here. So in other words, this new matrix declaration is going to not create just the array of int references, but also these actual integer arrays. So this creates, you can think of it as, if we look at this carefully, this line that we're about to run, it creates one array. Okay, this line actually creates 5 arrays. This array plus this, and this. Okay, so 5 total arrays are created. 1 of references, 4 of integers. And if you want to create a literal array, right? If you decide that you don't want to have this obviously very wordy way of declaring Pascal's triangle, there is a literal notation for doing 2-dimensional arrays. Okay, so in that case, we would just get the same thing laid out a little differently for some reason. Okay, so that is the heart of what makes a 2-dimensional array a 2-dimensional array. Okay? They are actually references of references. So you may find this a little hard to fully grok, but it'll be okay because later when we do this assignment called seam carving, you will get a better hand. Okay, that'll be much later. Okay? And these are just repeating some points that I said during the earlier demo. So this very first line, it creates one box of 64 bits that can refer to an array, or that refers to an array of int arrays. Okay, of int array references. Whew. Right, see? Confounding. This next line, though, it in this case creates 4 additional boxes, and each of them is null. So this is 1 box, 4 boxes. Down here, if we look at this line, just to pick out what it does total, well, it first creates an array which has 3 boxes. It puts the numbers 1, 2, and 1 in them, and then it assigns the address to this box. Okay? And as I said before, this one makes 1 total array. This is 5 arrays. Okay? So just some highlights of terminology that maybe are not that interesting to listen to me say, but you can convince yourself of the truth of these statements. Okay? So now an exercise for you that I'd like you to ponder. Okay? Knowing what we've just said, okay, because just watching me do that's probably not going to lead to a great deal of understanding, I want you to tell me here, when I run this code, okay, and create these other variables, what is going to be the value of x00 and w00 when this code completes. And in this case, what I'm going to have you do is click on this answer link if you want the answer. And if you really hate going to the website, opening the slides, and clicking the link, I put it at the top so you can type it in manually.